Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Mirror Now Dialogues with me, Vinay Tewari, in association with Exchange for Media. And I'm absolutely delighted and happy to have a guest today who I am possibly the most excited to speak to. You know, we've spoken to many sectors in the past, but this particular sector has been in the news. You can't miss this particular industry and you can't miss the company he represents. Warm welcome to Atit Mehta. Vice President and Head of Marketing for BYJU'S. It's a name that possibly everybody in India currently now knows. And if for some reason you haven't heard of it before, you just need to switch on a television match and you'll find that name emblazoned across every single Indian cricketer's jerseys as well. And I'll speak a thing or two about Atit later on. But coming to the more important questions, Atit, you know, in the previous episodes, we've spoken to a few industry captains who belong to sectors which possibly had a very difficult last year. I mean, you know, there was the pain of the pandemic and of course the lockdown and of course the changing consumer pattern behavior that their industry suffered. But as stars aligned, the way things panned out, there was one sector which possibly became India's brightest and the biggest sunrise in sector, which is the edtech sector, the sector that you guys started off, even before the pandemic started. And I'm sure that your experience with the pandemic was very different from the way, say, in a sector like the auto or some of the other service industries panned out. How has your pandemic been? And I'm asking this not just from the negativity of the pandemic, but also in terms of the way the industry has panned out and the acceptability that the last year's experience forced people to do.
So first and foremost, thank you very, very much for having me do this conversation with you, Vinay. Coming to your question, while none of us as individuals wanted the last 12 months what we went through, but from a business perspective, it couldn't have been better. Yeah. Since the schools were shut down, and what we all realized is that in such a situation, schools is the first thing to shut down and will be the last thing to open up. And that's exactly where the things have panned out. We have not yet seen schools opening up, and the academic year is expected to start in a couple of months, and we don't have clarity. There was a lot of anxiety amongst parents, and they were fearing a learning loss. They were fearing a year of learning going off their kids. And the inflection point happened when people started downloading the app. And what we saw in the first 5 years of our journey, we saw that happening in the last 12 months. So from that aspect, exponential growth of the sector, exponential growth of the adoption of online learning, because there was no other option available and nobody wanted a learning loss. So in a way, it wasn't the best way to achieve the numbers what we achieved, but yeah, we are happy that the digital ecosystem, the digital learning piece caught the imagination of our nation, and students started moving and learned digitally and did not end up losing a year or losing a learning year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I have always believed that edtech as a sector, despite all that is talked about it, is also fulfilling a big gap. I mean, and last year provided a gap which was also physical in nature. I mean, you just couldn't go to a classroom, teachers couldn't access anything. And obviously this gap got filled. And I think the parents' biggest worry is possibly a lack of continuity in education or even learning. Even if there was a break in a bit of continuity, the learning curve shouldn't stop, especially at younger ages, which is an absolute must. So absolutely, I mean, I completely agree with you that this was, nobody would have wanted a pandemic, but of course, you guys came in and filled in a gap which possibly would not have happened if we did not have startups like the ones which you brought into the industry. But before I get down to the more sectoral specific questions, I had a few curiosity-based questions, and I'm sure everybody has those questions, which is this. Look, I mean, education per se has 3 or 4 different segments to it. There is, of course, the primary education, there is secondary, there is higher, and then there's, of course, the professional education. Which of these 4 sectors, so to speak, have been the biggest growth engines for you and also the most exciting for you? I mean, is there a differentiation in the way each one is growing, or do you see a similarity in the patterns?
No, certainly, because if you break this down and if you look at the professional segment, it's very important to understand that what is the addressable universe. Yeah, there are X number of people or students who write a professional examination. But when you look at primary and secondary education, you have close to about 270 odd million students in India. And then if you look at pre-primary, those consist of about 3 or 4 standards. If I start with nursery, which is LKG, going up to standard 2, standard 3, that's about 4 to 5 years. And then you have about 7 to 8 years, which is your primary and secondary, and then your professional examination. So the middle two segment was where the maximum amount of students are there in terms of number of years. Yeah, because the professional segment is too small in terms of number of addressable students. So that saw the fastest growth if one has to break the education into four parts.
I see. There is one other segment that exists in India, and that possibly the contrast is most intense in a country like India, and that's the gap between the urban and the rural India. And if I break down urban further, maybe tier A towns and then tier B and tier C towns as well. Was there a bit of a differentiation there as well?
No, even it was a big, pleasant surprise for all of us. And what we also realized is that at least in tier one markets, even in tier two markets, at least the top 1%, 2% of schools adopted to digital learning, because the students had the hardware available in terms of a mobile device or a laptop. The schools created the LMS system. So for them, it was not that big a worry. But the biggest segment to get hit because of schools being shut was the belly of the population, and which is then scattered across the pop strata as far the states are concerned. So the majority of the growth happened from tier 2, tier 3 markets, while growth also happened from tier 1 markets. But the big growth came from tier 2, tier 3.
I see. That's interesting. And because, Atit, you mentioned about how the biggest chunk of course, the students belong to the primary and the secondary segment. And of course, the professional segment is going to be the smallest, pretty obviously. Let's spend a little time speaking about these two segments, because that's also the segment that possibly concerns not just individuals, but families. I mean, every family in India's biggest concern is, of course, the children's education. And each one is looking for its own way of making it better and better than the previous generation. I mean, I think all of us are products of our parents having sacrificed and invested a lot in us reaching where we have, simply because they put education above everything else. And that's the way India is. But one specific point I wanted to ask you, that EdTech as a sector pretty much is linked to how well the growth in the formal education sector happens. It goes together. One can't happen without the other. The government's new education policy has put a target of 50%, in gross enrollment by, I think, another 10 years or so. But clearly, there is a lot of headroom in that, in that sector. I mean, we still have a long way to go, even to get children to come into the formal sector as well. So, in that sense, does say an EdTech major and a leading player, possibly the biggest player right now you have in the world, like BYJU'S, look at the formal education sector more closely on how that's growing? Because without that growing, there will be some amount of stunted growth for you.
No, absolutely, absolutely. There is no better place than a physical classroom for getting the right level of education, and that needs to start, that needs to grow, and we need to have better schools in terms of infrastructure. We need to have better connectivity, because now everything is moving digital. So school needs to create that ecosystem. So yeah, we closely follow everything in the offline world. Yeah, it's very important that we also partner with the educational boards to ensure that the right level of education is imparted to all the students who are part of the primary and secondary segment. Plus, it's also very important that we feel that teachers, this is the golden age of teachers. Yeah, because if we are not able to get the right quality of teachers, the right pedagogy which the teachers provide, then we will never become an educational powerhouse. So everything now works in tandem. Now the digitization has happened as a country. Yeah, people have experienced the online version of studying, and nobody is saying that you need to replace a school and only study online. This is a plus one, because no student is alike. Yeah, come home and learn through the digital content which is available will certainly help you conceptually clear your doubts. So the online is now a plus one. Schools will start, and we are hopeful, and we are all looking forward to school starting. And we are very closely following the entire now the new school normal, as we put in, and see how the next 3 to 5 years shape up, which we strongly believe is going to be a blended learning approach.
I mean, it's very apt that you mentioned things about how, technology is playing a big part, and of course, sometimes the inconsistent penetration of technology that India has. It's a very diverse country. You will have certain bandwidth issues in some cities, maybe in some parts of the country. You may, even in cities, there are some places where there may be an issue. So, it's very interesting. I just, I wanted to understand your mind on a very specific issue that came to my mind when I was just reading up a little bit about how this industry is panning out. Ironically, when I was growing up, when I was in school, the first hint of a mass universal education platform, a technology-based education system, was actually the UGC countrywide classroom. And I remember in 84, 85, when actually nobody had heard of something like that, Doordarshan used to put out this 1 hour classroom during the afternoon. So in that sense, they understood the importance of putting out education in a more qualitative manner at a mass level. And of course, now with technology being, I mean, of course, there was no technology then, but now. But having said that, the reason I brought up the UGC example is this. Even today, for education to really, I mean, for you or any edtech major to become a partner in the process of educating India, it's very important that we keep looking at another segment that gets marginalized whenever something like e-learning comes in, which is more over 500 million people who possibly still don't have access to smartphones. They're still on 2G, and this is the number the TRAI gives us. Do you believe that even for a company like Baiju, which is investing heavily in of course, making online education extremely popular, there may be a cause to even consider, say, something like a television platform to address that 500 million segment that will still take a few years to reach, the optimum level of high-tech phone access or gadget access?
No, one can certainly look at a broadcast platform or like television to impart education, but the beauty of the business is that education is very customized and very personalized. Yeah. The If I am in a 7th standard grade and you are in a 7th standard grade, I will understand and learn a subject faster or slower than you would. Yeah. And then there are multiple subjects and multiple sort of grades. So one can look at broadcasting education, and which we tried doing it in our small way. During the lockdown, we started BYJU'S classes. And since there were no classes happening, we had our own teachers, India's best teachers, on a scheduled basis. So there was a weekly schedule, there was a monthly schedule, and sessions were scheduled, and the students had to just log in. But it still does not address the question in terms of connectivity, and half of the country is still not penetrated, or there will be problems in having the right bandwidth to stream a video or to stream a session. But yeah, slowly and gradually it is moving. The best part is what we were 3 years ago and what we are right now and what we would be 3 years down the line. It is growing at a very, very fast rate. So over a period of time, the country should get connected and everybody will have access. And that's exactly what we intend doing, that reaching, we want to democratize education. We
Right.
want to have education going to look and corner of the country and ensuring that every student in that age group gets the school level education. So putting it on a television, it's an option, but we have yet not tried it.
Right. No, I mean, look, I'm sure Byju's have already addressed this issue, but for those who are not very familiar with how you approach this, I have a very specific question. Look, in India, I mean, I grew up in Lucknow, for instance, and of course, in those days, CBSE was not a very popular board. Now we had ISC and ICSE, which is also a more popular board in those towns. And now you have different state boards also. And each state in India varies in the way they teach, in the way they expect, and even in the way they mark and assess their students. So there are very different expectations. And I remember there are fables about how somebody would say, oh, you're from X state's board, it's so tough. Nobody gets more than 70%. And another one say, oh, but you guys are very lenient, you get 90. The point I'm making is there is a differentiation in the way different boards operate. Now, how does Byju's reconcile with that? Because that means there are almost 30, 35 models of how teaching is done in different states. And of course, the different boards that exist. I mean, is there how do you work at the back end to handle something like that?
Yeah. So our educational content, which we have created, is mapped to 14 state boards, and it's also mapped to CBSE and ICSE. So if you are, for example, a Maharashtra State Board, and you register yourself as Maharashtra State Board, the content which is then provided to you will be as per your Maharashtra State Board curriculum, and that's applicable across the other state boards, ICSE and CBSE. But beyond that, if I have to teach you integers, or if I have to teach you some concept in physics or science, some boards might be having it in the second term, some might be having in the first term, some might be having in the next year. That's the only significant difference. But the concept of how to learn about integers or how to learn about Pythagoras theorem is going to be common. It's just that it's 6 months prior or it's 6 months later. So it's just aligning the curriculum and creating content which talks to that relevant board. So that's already mapped in the paid version.
Right. One other question, and I'm asking you to possibly reveal a trade secret. Maybe it's not a secret, but I'm very curious to know, because that answer will possibly help me understand how India is approaching a problem and where the problem is, which is this. Is there a specific subject or a bunch of subjects where you've seen the maximum demand coming in? Because that will also tell you where the maximum gap is in terms of the quality of education. I mean, I, for instance, grew up in a city where mathematics teachers were universally bad. I mean, we all kind of liked or disliked maths because our teachers were good or bad, depending on which school you went to. Are there certain subjects that you have greater traction for or much greater traction for?
So over the years, we had maths and science as our key subject delivery. 6, 8 months back, we added social science, which is history, geography. Uh, but if I have to look at the 4 subjects which we have, certainly maths is the number one pain point both for students as well as for parents. And we have all gone through that journey of trying to solve maths problems. So maths is the number one piece. But we also strongly believe that spoken English,
Right.
yeah, is also a concern, because we were fortunate and our parents, as you mentioned, sent us to good schools and we ended up learning and talking and speaking in English. But that might not be the case with majority of students across the country. So English should also become, the spoken English, written English can also become a big area of concentration. But as of right now, it's maths.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad you brought up English, because I remember, English is up in small town India. It's seen as an aspirational language. It's also seen as a passport to success. And I remember even in towns like Azamgarh, for instance, last time when we were there during elections, every street in Azamgarh had 4 or 5 English-speaking tutorial classes. I mean, of course, the quality was, a lot to be desired. And I guess that's where, things like BYJU'S come in, because that's more consistent and that's more qualitatively, the QC, of course, is like, million times better than what they are aspiring to be. But yes, I mean, English definitely, I would have assumed, would be one of the big factors in India. Which brings me to the other question, Atit, that look, I mean, there has been obviously along with technology, and this is something that all of us, you, me, all of us are possibly facing it. There are issues and concerns that people have raised also about especially the primary and the secondary education level, of the screen time that the children are having currently and how that is going to go up. Now, one of the ways in which possibly the edtech majors can work is also to look at encouraging children or parents to allow or to push children to get out there and play. And that becomes an equal part of what you guys are pushing. But do you see that as something which should be part of the DNA on how things will move for the edtech sector? Because these concerns will remain, and there will be those medical science doctors or even experts who will keep raising these issues about increasing screen time for children, which they deem to be harmful.
No, absolutely. So those concerns from a parent perspective or from a school perspective will certainly remain. But in today's day and age, a kid is spending a reasonable amount of time on a digital device. Yeah. And the whole premise is that if I am spending that time learning something rather than spending that time playing a mobile game or watching content which at my age I'm not supposed to watch it, yeah, it's still a better situation. Yeah, there are concerns, but the positives are outweighing the negatives in terms of digital screen time. And what we realized is that we have moved from a blackboard to a digital screen, and that's going to stay. Yeah. But if you are able, if it's not about spending 5, 6 hours on a online education content, what one is asking for is spend about 20, 25 minutes every day. And if you do that, it's not going to impact your eyes, it's not going to impact anything else. But yeah, if you end up spending 8, 10 hours, whether reading something on a digital screen or watching something or playing a game, certainly content is not important. Then the screen will damage your eyes and everything else. So half an hour in a day, I think it's much more, the value of the output is much more than the impact which you see on yourself.
Right. I mean, one interesting, aspect that comes out of it. India always had a very large tutors market, and a lot of it was unorganized, where you had a neighborhood, tutor who would just cater to the neighborhood, or you also had a little more organized business approach. I mean, BYJU'S acquired Akash, which was quite a major acquisition and quite a headline-grabbing event. We've also had a unique country where you have towns which are almost tutorial towns. You have Kota, you have towns in Andhra Pradesh which virtually entirely revolve around tutorials. Uh, and there is a certain amount of mechanical approach that has come into it. It's almost like a factory where people are. It's like another college where people are shoved in, and in Kota specifically, we've seen the negative side of that as well. I mean, there are quite a lot of stories about how students are going through enormous pressure. The rate of suicide in Kota is actually higher than the other districts of Rajasthan, and a lot of them are attributed to this coaching culture. Uh, in many ways, isn't BYJU'S then trying to just replace the informal tutor sector? And I'm asking this question for a specific reason, because till now, parents were engaging tutors because it brought in a sense of time discipline and some kind of organized approach in a child's life, that the tutor is going to come at 4 or you have to go at 4. So you're forced to do that. So in that sense, BYJU'S is doing a great job by actually allowing a more qualitative tutor-based approach. But the negative of that is that it takes away the structured mindset that some parents do have in terms of the discipline that they want the children to go through.
No, it does. And slowly and gradually that is also changing, because what are we saying? We are saying that online education, BYJU'S provides you conceptual clarity. BYJU'S will provide you movies like video, which will help. And if I'm explaining something in a very well produced 2-3 minutes video with high level of animation and graphic and explaining that entire piece, you will start putting a schedule to yourself, and you will not require somebody to push you for that 4 o'clock class, or get the teacher in your house at 4 o'clock in the evening. So it's all about making students fall in love with learning, and we are doing that with conceptual concepts. So we explain you concepts which are conceptually staying with you for the longest time, in a format which is very easy to understand and comprehend. So will it change overnight? No, it will not change. But are we seeing a sort of a trend where people are now going and creating their own schedules, and don't require, especially students, don't require a push that please step out of the house and reach to your tuition classes for a particular slot. So it's moving, and it is moving in the right direction.
So do you think in the next 5 years or so, we are actually now looking at a situation where, with the rapid advancements in things like AI technology, for instance, education can actually get so personalized that it becomes, a class really becomes specifically targeted at you? I mean, because I'm assuming that with data investment technology, AI will soon be able to actually almost predict patterns and figure out what a student wants, what it doesn't want, what he or she is weak in, what is the pattern of the questions she's asking, and so on and so forth. I mean, so are we looking at that situation where very soon you may have an absolutely customized product, even if, say, there are 3 children in the same family and using the same platform?
No, it will. In fact, it's already started. Now, I'll just give you an example. Yeah, I'm taking a test on BYJU'S. Yeah, and there are 20 questions. I get 10 questions wrong. I get 10 questions right. Those 10 questions, I'll have to retake the test to move to the second segment. The the second set of questions which pops up to me are much lower difficulty level. Even if I don't get 20 on 20 or 18 on 20, the difficulty level will come down. But if I have answered and if I move to the next stage, the level of difficulty goes up. And that's the way the video plays out. So that is hardcore. Machine has learned itself. The algorithms are working. And the more time spent, the more usage data we get, the system, the machine learning and the artificial intelligence behind that will become much more stronger. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that if not 5 years, but in a couple of years, it will become as customized and as personalized as one would want.
Wow, that sounds very exciting. I mean, some people might find it scary, but I find it exciting because technology is something you can't stay away from. It's part of our life, and I guess everybody doesn't even realize how much technology plays a part in all our lives. Very exciting. Let me move away from a little bit of technicality and ask you a question which interests me a lot personally. Tell me a little bit of the story. I mean, you've been one of the lead principal architects behind BYJU'S being the Indian cricket team sponsor, and I'm a big fan of cricket, so it's something that I follow very keenly. Tell me a little bit of the backstory. Why is it that the BYJU'S thought that, using, say, somebody like a Shah Rukh Khan or a film star or cricket was one way of actually ensuring that the world comes to know of something which is actually counterintuitive, which is education, because traditionally Indians don't put sports and education together.
Yeah. So Shah Rukh was basically using a film celebrity, a known name. The decision was taken about 5 years ago for when we launched the business. That time nobody knew us. There was no online segment. There was nothing like EdTech. So it was more about mass reach and at least getting us noticed. And it was in the discovery phase. We wanted people to discover us, and a celebrity from that aspect makes sense. And we have continued, and then every time when we went back, the business was looking bigger, stronger, and we continued that. But as far cricket is concerned, what our philosophy is, what we strongly believe is that for an overall, education is not about the academics. Education is all about the 360 development of a child. Yeah. And what sports teaches you, no, nothing can teach you. It will teach you team play, it will teach you respect, it will teach you discipline, it will teach you hard work, it will teach you success, and it will also teach you that after success how to be grounded. So all those aspects is a sports aspect. And if that's your filter number one, the second filter is then which is the most prominent sports in the country. We didn't require any PhD in marketing to answer that question. So the choice became very, very simple. Yeah. And fortunately for us, the 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 availability of the sponsorship was also critical, because this is a single slot sponsorship. It's not like I'm taking a serial sponsorship where there are 8 or 10 brands. There is only one brand. You are there or you're not there. Fortunately for us, the timing worked out. We were scaling up big time, and the belief was coming together that sports will play an equally big role in the overall development. So all this put together, it was very, very simple answer that it has to be the Indian cricket team.
I'm glad it is, because I mean, if cricket and films can push people to imbibe a better way of getting educated, why not? I mean, as I said, when we were discussing earlier that even in the Pulse Polio program, where the government was struggling a bit in certain parts, they ended up using a major celebrity, a major film star to actually push people, and it worked. So why not? Let me ask you something. I mean, of course, the last 1 year has been very exciting and very, very good from a business point of view by BYJU'S. But if I have my data right, we have about 10 million users currently, right? Active registered users in the industry per se. And I'm assuming it's about 4.5, 5 billion worth of industry currently, if my math is correct. Where do you see this going in the next, say, 2 years from now? I don't want to make it a longer than 2 year period, but do you see this as a conservative estimate, or do you think that this can be maybe 4 times more or 5 times more in the next 2 years?
No, so I think it's not 10 million. Yeah. BYJU'S subscriber base, yeah, is about 80 million. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I meant 100 million. My apologies. Yes.
Yeah. So at an industry level, as a segment, it would be close to about 100 odd million. While the total school going population, if you look at IRS and all this industry India database, it stacks up to about 260 to 70 million. So technically, we are only 1/3. The penetration of online education is only 1/3. That's point number one. Point number two is the paid subscribers at an industry level on 100 million base would be at about 5.5 to 6 million. So that means we have penetrated only 5% of the category. That's so right. There is a humongous headroom for growth, and we believe that year on year, this growth should be at an exponential level, both at top of the funnel as well as more and more people taking the annual packages.
But you also see that this industry for the next 2 years will really be about expanding customer base, or is also going to be about expanding into, say, newer areas. For instance, one new area that gets talked about is the online extracurricular world, for instance, not just the formal education. Is that something that you see also coming in and fueling the growth, or will it be just a question of adding more numbers in terms of the headroom that you spoke of?
It will be both, and it will be a two-pronged approach. You will certainly be looking at growing your top of the funnel, adding more and more people to the larger kitty. as well as having strong content pipeline, having strong launches coming in. So for example, as I mentioned, we launched social science. Yeah, now we are launching social science across more grades and more boards. So that's a product thing. We spoke about English. And what has also happened is that parents are looking at creating or at least ensuring the students get something beyond education. So you have a lot of extracurricular coaching. So there is online music happening, online sports happening, online coding happening, online one-to-one maths happening. So there is enough and more happening over and above education. It's all happening in the online space, and that continues. So again, so sports, extracurricular, and education, if you look at it at an holistic view, and if one goes through this journey, we don't see a reason that that person will become a very, very strong, rounded personality as he goes into the professional journey as well as his professional career.
Okay. My final question to you, Atit, is again something linked to technology, because this is an industry that works with the technology, and that is pretty soon enough. I mean, we will have 5G coming in as well, and that is going to change a lot of things as well. Uh, Obviously, for the better. I mean, there are of course some sectors who may. I mean, the broadcast sector, for instance, has their own issues with some of the 5G proposals we have. But for the consumer, there couldn't have been a better time in terms of upgrading the technology. So I'm assuming that once that comes in, even the animation design and the quality of the transmission that currently exists or people can access currently is going to grow exponentially. And the good thing, and I think the best thing that could have happened, is India is also a very, very strong base for animation design per se. I mean, we have very, very skilled people who work on it, world class professionals who work on the industry. So I'm assuming that 5G is another thing that BYJU'S and the entire tech industry is looking at very, very closely.
Yes, absolutely. So see, technology, we will not be able to be stagnant on the technology front. Every year, every month, every minute, there is a technology advancement happening. But one is geared up, one is preparing for it. If 5G technology is available, we need to test it out. Everything will happen at the back end with our tech and the product team, and whatever needs to be done to make the consumer experience better than what they are having, the business is committed to do that with the sole objective that we will provide the right level of infrastructure, with the right level of content, with the right level of teaching pedagogy to make the consumer or the student journey much, much better than what it was before.
Right. I wish we had more time and we could have continued forever, but this is a very exciting conversation. Atit, thank you so much for giving us insights on how BYJU'S works, and of course, how the whole edtech sector is looking up. And I'm sure that people are watching it would also be a little more educated about understanding the whole dynamics of how the edtech industry is working and the need and the use for it. Because, it's very easy to label any industry with a broad paintbrush. I mean, I think once you understand the specifics of it, it becomes easier to imbibe and adapt to that. So thank you very much. It's a great industry, education, something that we need in India much more than we have currently. And I'm absolutely delighted to have you tonight. Thank you, Atit. And
Thank you very, very much, Vinay. Thank you very much for having me.